Well, everybody, thank you for being so patient. And thank you, Michael Wolff, for joining me to talk about the Epstein Files. As you can all tell, Michael is not yet a Substack regular, which is why he's having problems. But I wanted to
I
talk
mean,
to Michael.
how many social media networks can you really master? I can
Well,
master very few.
right. Well, I know you can master Instagram because that was what sort of made me reach out to you this morning because you posted a real sort of, you say it, sort of saying that the right have kind of done this to themselves. I mean, do you want to explain it?
Well, I just think it's the people around Trump. It's Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, these jokers who have insisted that there is something to be released here about Jeffrey Epstein, and that there are files that will explain everything, and have increased this drumbeat for the administration to do something. And the profound irony at the center of that is the one person who is really exposed in the whole Epstein saga is Donald Trump.
Right. Right. Who has been really pretty silent about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which for many, many years, as you and I both know and have reported on extensively, was very close.
I mean, they were just absolutely the closest of friends, each other's best friend. They did everything together. They were joined at the hip. I mean, this is from hunting girls together, hunting being the right word, to sharing a girlfriend over the course of about a year, to
Who was that, Michael? Who was the girlfriend? Do you know?
I do, but
You don't want to get into it.
yes. Um, to being involved in each other's business lives, and not least of all, helping, or really Epstein helping Trump cheat on his taxes.
What? That I didn't know. So tell more.
Well, the Epstein point of view was that Trump had borrowed all this money from the bank, and then um, defaulted on it, and the banks forgave this money, and this was about This is basically about $1 billion in debt was forgiven, and when the banks when you get forgiven debt, that becomes income,
Right.
so, and nowhere is that reported on Donald Trump's taxes.
Right. But
Which of course it couldn't be, because if he didn't have the money to pay back the $1 billion, he didn't have the money to pay the taxes on that,
right.
which would have been $500 million.
Yes. So it's your understanding that Jeffrey Epstein told him.
Yeah, that was Jeffrey's scheme. Yeah,
that was Jeffrey's scheme.
Right. This shows up because the income shows up. It's one of those anomalies. The income doesn't show up anywhere.
Right. Well, I mean, the other thing that we know, I mean, I've reported on this, the hunting, as you put it. We know that they were together at the Plaza Hotel, which Trump then owned, when Melanie Walker, who became very senior at Microsoft and then the World Bank, very close to Bill Gates. She was, in a way, the conduit for Jeffrey Epstein to get to Bill Gates. But she met Epstein and Trump together in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel. and they both went up to her, which I always thought was a sort of somehow creepy anecdote, actually. So
But that's what they
what?
always did. These guys, they were, and this was, this is, I mean, the nature of predatory behavior. You're not looking for necessarily for social introduction.
Right.
It's literally anybody who strikes your fancy is then part of a play that you can make, which Trump did, of course, throughout his pre-political life, constantly.
So let's walk through. I mean, the thing that I think is sort of fascinating, it would be very easy for Trump to get up and tell us, this is just clear the air. It would be very easy for him to say, here's the deal with Epstein. We were friends. We were good friends. And then we fell out. But he's never done that. And I think your reporting on why they fell out is kind of interesting. I mean, there've been reports that there was two things that happened. One was that they fell out over a house rather. They both wanted to buy a mansion that was in bankruptcy in Palm Beach or close to Palm Beach. And also, Sam Nunberg, who's been on Vicky Ward Investigates, has said that Trump had told him that he was furious at Jeffrey for sort of preying on a minor at
Yeah,
Mar-a-Lago.
I think that's completely untrue. Trump invented that after Epstein became a problem. I mean, so this is classic Trump disinformation. So I mean, I don't think that there's any reason to believe that that's true. But the other thing, which does make entire amount of sense, because this what do rich guys fall out over? Always real estate, again and again and again. So what happened here, and this is Epstein's version, is that he believed himself to be the high bidder on a piece of property in Palm Beach. His bid was 36 million. He thought that he had this deal. He took his friend Trump with him to look at the property to advise him on moving the swimming pool. At which point Trump goes around his back and bids 40 million. Um, um, there was the additional aspect of this that Epstein knew that Trump did not have $40 million. So therefore, his assumption was that he was fronting for someone. And that very well may have been true, since this house was then this 40 house bought for $40 million was sold in I don't know, within maybe it was 18 months for $96 million.
Yeah,
So that
to
would
a guy I've met and know, Dmitry Rybolovlev, I believe.
Right. So the theory would have been that Rybolev was always the buyer, had used Trump as the front man. He bought the house, and that would be a pretty classic money laundering scheme. Um, but um, but then further, because because Epstein said that he began to make trouble for Trump about this, threatening to go to the press. This was that Trump was not a real buyer. Trump was the front man. At which point Epstein believed that, as he said, um, that Trump. I'm trying to think who said this, because it may have been um, Trump that bragged using the phrase "drop a dime." Anyway, somebody used the phrase to drop a dime on Epstein, and That is to call the police and say that and tell them what was going on at Epstein's house, which Trump surely knew because Trump spent an enormous amount of time there. And I've said before that Epstein used to bring out this set of pictures. There were about a dozen snapshots, um, and um, and among them, there are at least three that I remember, two of topless girls um, sitting sitting in Trump's lap around Epstein's swimming pool, and then one with a stain on the front of Trump's pants with three or four girls laughing and pointing at it. So I have seen those pictures.
So what's your best guess as to where they are?
Well, I'm my best guess is that Epstein kept them in the safe. The safe was emptied out by the FBI. Where are those pictures?
So there is a real question mark about the Epstein files.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I'm always resist this kind of nomenclature, the Epstein files, as if they have become something.
Yeah.
Um, um, I mean, I'm sure the FBI has files on Jeffrey Epstein. They mostly, I would assume, consist of um, of the depositions that have been taken by the various people who have testified in the multitude of court actions against Jeffrey Epstein. But in addition to that, there is whatever materials they have gathered from um, when they went through his houses. Now, I mean, I have a sense of what was there because they've had to disclose that, or at certain points they've had to disclose that to Epstein's attorneys. So I've discussed this with them, um, and they have looked for these pictures, but um,
Wait, who's looked for the pictures?
the Epstein's attorneys.
Right.
So, but anyway, no one, the pictures do not now seem to be among the disclosed information.
Well,
Um,
I will tell you, at Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, there was remarkable piece of testimony from one of the FBI agents who went into Epstein's New York house when he was arrested, having landed from Paris. And the FBI agents went in there, and there were a bunch of, I think they were videos. They looked at the safe, but they didn't have the right kind of warrant to actually collect the stuff. So they then left. And when they went back the next day, these things were no longer there. And Epstein's personal lawyer and accountant, the two guys who were, supposed to be administering the fund, then he said, "Oh, so sorry," and then brought it back. But I mean, who knows what could have happened in the meantime? I mean, I thought that 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 particular piece of testimony didn't reflect too well on the FBI. But I want to go back to something that you have said before about the disintegration of the Trump Epstein relationship. So, because I think until now I hadn't quite got the seriousness of Epstein's claims. So, I mean, because he was really threatening to accuse Trump of money laundering.
Precisely.
So you've said that Epstein believed that it was Trump who put law enforcement onto him. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Can you say any more about why Epstein thought that?
Well, I mean, I I I think this was from what Epstein said. He just spells out a set of circumstances. This happened at the same time as or shortly after the breakdown in the relationship. Trump certainly knew what was going on in some detail at Jeffrey's house. And so I that I don't know anything beyond that. Those are factors that Epstein put together, um, and to make this assumption.
Right.
But I do know that Epstein was afraid of Trump, and certainly when Trump became president, that was a persistent feeling that he had.
Right. Well, it was during Trump's presidency that he was arrested.
Of course, of course. And just to go over, that was in July 2019.
Right. Do you have any knowledge if Jeffrey Epstein believed when he was arrested in 2019 that the then president had anything to do with that?
Mm, Um, I think that he suspected as much, but equally, I think he suspected that the people within the Justice Department and within the Southern District were out to get Trump.
Out to
So,
get Trump.
no, in other words, yes. So this could have worked both ways. So Trump, through main justice, trying to shut Epstein down, trying to get him out of the picture, or the other way, from whatever you want to call it, the deep state, or just the righteous figures in the Southern District looking to get Trump. Therefore, Epstein becomes a pawn on either side.
I don't follow that. Sorry, am I being really stupid? How was Epstein a way to get to Trump?
Well, because Epstein knew
Oh, I
this
see. You see, with his
enormous amount about Trump, of course.
okay. So then, okay. So you believe? I agree with you. You know what's in the Epstein files. Because I mean that to call them to call it a client list. I mean Jeffrey Epstein, the person that I encountered, wasn't the kind of person to keep a client list. That wasn't how he operated. He also, I was looking at my old interview notes and transcripts of his. He said to me once that when you know he said something interesting. As you know, I've always been very intrigued and frustrated about the fact that nobody really knows how Jeffrey Epstein to this day made his money. And they also don't really necessarily know where Jeffrey Epstein put his money and the money of his business clients. I suspect we don't know the half of it. But Jeffrey Epstein did say to me once that when rich people lose money, they don't go to the law. They don't go to the police and they don't go to the FBI. And he was telling me that because back in the 1980s, he said he was somebody who would go and try and retrieve stolen money for wealthy people. And then they would give him the power of attorney and then he would keep the money. I mean, I'm just telling you what
Yeah,
has
no,
been
no.
reported.
He was full of this kind of conjured stuff. I mean, he once told me, he said, I run a reverse Ponzi scheme. In
Yeah,
a real Ponzi scheme, you you make you make it appear that money that doesn't exist exists. In my Ponzi scheme, I make money that does exist appear not to exist.
right. Which sounds, Michael, not necessarily legal.
Well, it sounds more legal or less illegal than an actual Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
But yes, and the example that he gave is that if a wealthy man gets divorced and you hide $100 million, well, then you save $50 million.
Right. So where do you? So that's this is what I mean. So I mean, so he could put it offshore. I mean, what I discovered.
I mean, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, no
Well,
one
what I
knows, and this is, and then there were in the later years. I mean, I believe, and I met several highly dubious characters at Jeffrey's house, of people who represented large, vast amounts of money that in the hands uh, of of problematic regimes in problematic countries.
right. Well, I mean, that's the other now theory doing the rounds, right? Among I see Tucker Carlson, that the reason no one's going to release the real data that they have is because he must have been some sort of agent or spy. I my view on that is that he was somebody who talked to everybody. I don't think he was working for a particular government. I don't know what your take on that is.
Yeah, well, I always used to think the word work in the context of Jeffrey Epstein is a somewhat of a misnomer, because I certainly never saw the guy do a lick of work.
Yeah,
Um, but I mean, Jeffrey knew an enormous number of people of power, people of influence, who enjoyed his company. I mean, I think we're mesmerized by him in so many ways, and part of what was mesmerizing is that everybody came away with knowing things they did not know. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was certainly a conduit of all kinds of information. Um,
can
now,
you give an example?
um, I, well, I can only set the scene that every day there are these people who came to sit around Jeffrey Epstein's dining room table. And this was always a kind of a movable feast of the food just coming. You sat down and he would say, "What do you want?" and reel off a list of options. And then if you had been there a few times, you learned not to take anything, because it was always suddenly you were sitting at this table talking to people, and then suddenly you alone had a plate full of food. Um, but all of this, from this quite extraordinary gamut of people who were there talking about the affairs of the world at an enormously high level. Um, and at a knowledgeable level. I mean, these were some former prime ministers, or heads of finance in various countries. Um, it the I mean, again, I mean, I was there many times, and it was a kind of a riveting experience.
Right. And of course, I mean, the mystery is, how did a guy who didn't have a college degree and had no like real, formal training in anything, wasn't in the markets himself, why and how was he able to command such respect
Well,
from,
yeah, and no, and the assumption is that he was blackmailing people, which I think is untrue. That he was supplying women to people, and that was the source of his attraction and wealth, which I also think is not true. Quite the opposite. I think that people were there because they deeply enjoyed his company. They deeply enjoyed being able to sit at this table, meeting all kinds of people. It was a kind of a,
it's like a salon, it sounds like.
yeah, but a very level, more maybe men's club like, a very leveled environment, in which um, in which he was the sort of master of ceremonies, or maybe more the talk show host. Um, and he kind of conducted this thing of bringing people out. I mean, everybody had a good time, great
But
time.
he did, because I've interviewed Kira Dictia in the past for my podcast, and I mean, he did definitely pay women. They weren't children; they were, adults. To, she told me one time when the Emir of Qatar came, and when did um, the NBS, now the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, they were. She was a professional model, and she and some of her friends. I mean, he paid her $1,000 to sit in the hall and just look
Well,
decorative.
I mean, there were always women there. Um,
Right.
I mean, I never had the feeling that they were underage women. I always had the feeling and always thought of them as kind of gallery girls, or the girls who are sit out front in any kind of art gallery worth its salt. They could have been working for Larry Gagosian. I mean, all incredibly poised, good looking, young, um, and but at the same time with a kind of professional veneer. Um, and I think that was part of the sort of the hierarchy of girls that surrounded him. The girls in West Palm Beach were which I think were his particular thing. I mean, I don't think that was something that he was that open about. Um,
Right.
um, and then there were the girls, as I say, the gallery girl types, and then there were the models who came in and out. I mean, they're mostly often Eastern European models.
Yes. I mean, I think it is worth actually what you just said
But
about,
but
like,
but I just want to make the point that they were certainly not the main event in any way at for what happened at Jeffrey's house. They hovered in the background. Um, and there was that awkward moment when Prince Andrew was doing his awkward, to say the least, interview, and he said something like he couldn't tell them apart. They were interchangeable, or he didn't remember tell one from the other, and that was in fact true. um I mean, they had no real identities. They were just part of this
well, yeah,
part of the background of what went on there, functionaries.
right. Although I think Virginia Roberts, that was probably different, because one, she was underage, and two, obviously it was just her, when she met Prince Andrew, certainly in
Yeah, well,
London.
I mean, I know your
You know,
feelings about this. I always figured that's
yeah.
the fishiest story I ever heard in my life, and the stuff that has recently happened just kind of confirms that's like, oh my God, what was going on there?
Well, I think I need to catch up on the news, but I think there's a story. I think also Virginia Roberts' husband has some questions to answer.
Well, I don't know. It just is that kind of thing. Okay, we're never going to get to the bottom of this. And anyway, I always thought it was also interesting
Right.
that she was never called to testify in any of the actions against him.
Well, she wasn't called to testify in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial.
She was
Uh,
not called to testify in any of the trials because she was not I mean I can only assume because she was thought not to be a very reliable witness.
well, or she had been deposed. Um, she'd been deposed already in the civil action with Ghislaine Maxwell. So, I mean, look, the mystery remains about Jeffrey Epstein. You've got, very wealthy guys
But I think
paying him a lot
one
of
of the
money.
things there are many mysteries about Jeffrey Epstein, but the one thing that is not particularly a mystery is his relationship with Trump. Um, the mystery is that has received so little attention. That may be changing. I mean, I noticed there was a kind of a fairly vivid point by point story about what was known of their relationship, which is substantial, in the Wall Street Journal today.
Well, we shall see. But of course, this is but this is, if there turns out to be there, this is going to be a case of eating your own, right? Because it's his base who are demanding the
Yeah,
answers.
no, totally. As I say, a great among the mysteries. Now there is a great irony at the center of this.
Right, Michael. Well, um, what have I not asked you? I mean, there's never been any suggestion that I've ever heard of anywhere that Trump went to the island or anything like that. I mean, do you know of anything?
Well, the island came about, as I understand it, on the timeline after the relationship with Trump
No. Oh,
broke down.
no, because he had it when I interviewed him in 2002. And he'd had it for a while in the late 90s. I think he had it in the late 1990s. So he and Trump were
But
close.
the construction, he had it, and then he didn't build this out until later. I mean, we should check the dates on this, but that was always my understanding.
So, so the house auction, I think, was in 2004.
That was in 2004. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you mean the island wasn't built out properly?
Hmm. Yeah, my
So,
understanding, he bought that island, and it was pretty much just uninhabited, or whatever was there um, was rudimentary, and then he built that into landing strips and big houses, um, and that came after, I believe. But there's a lot to keep track of here.
so why do you think Trump hasn't turned around to Pan Bondi, Cash Patel down and shut this down? I mean,
Well,
until now.
I think that there was I think that may have happened now. And I don't know what happened. I mean, except we know that there was we're going to release all this, and then there was we're not going to release all this. Lots of stuff exists, nothing exists. So that's all we know.
Well, I do think she misspoke when she talked about the client list, because I just, even knowing Jeffrey Epstein just through our interactions in 2002, and very occasionally, when I would run into him since then, he wouldn't, I mean, he's just not, to your point about not working, he just wouldn't have been, he wasn't the kind of guy who had a client list. I mean, he's the kind of guy who would have
Well,
people in
I
for
don't even know
breakfast,
what
lunch,
that
and
means,
dinner.
the client list. What kind of
Yeah,
clients are we talking about here? Are we talking about his business clients, who may or may not have existed, or are we talking about his clients as him working as a pimp, theoretically?
right,
I don't know what we're talking about.
right. But it just will either way. Um, he's not the kind of guy, in my estimation, to keep a list. I mean, if you look at his rushed emails to Jeff Staley that came up in all that litigation, the way he would he would toss off his correspondence as if he barely had time to send an email. And I always thought that was sort of calculated and clever. It made him look very busy and very important to legitimately
Well,
busy,
I
important
don't. Yeah,
people.
I mean, I don't. I mean, there was no office.
Yeah,
I mean, it was Jeffrey Epstein sitting at his dining room table, conducting his this breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's it. I mean, even this idea that he had videotapes and was videotaping everyone. Somebody else I know who knew Epstein. We were just talking about this the other day, um, and it strained. I mean, it was like, well, how would this happen? How would this have gotten done? Who would have administered this? Um, and the answer seemed to be it could only have been then Jojo the houseman. There just wasn't that kind of thing going on around
right.
Epstein.
Well, the other thing I think that is important is certainly my sources suggested that there was a lot of there was a lot of civil litigation. There was a lot of settlements that that happened between women in Jeffrey's orbits and other
A
men.
lot, a lot.
And
I mean,
and
there was
and
probably,
so
even before he died, there were tens of millions, possibly $100 million in settlements.
right. And between men and women, they may have met through Jeffrey Epstein. And so the issue is that, when people talk about the FBI will only investigate if somebody makes a complaint. And so, it would have seemed that once Ghislaine Maxwell paid a price, um, my reporting suggested that the men in Epstein's orbit um, had bought silence.
I don't understand that exactly. So,
So if there were men who'd you know had relationship or had encounters with maybe they were underage, maybe that there was a lot of there were a lot of settlements made and NDAs. So nobody was interested in going to the FBI because they were X million richer.
yeah, I don't know. And I mean, the only thing that that I know, I mean, and having spent, I mean, in 2014, Jeffrey Epstein talked to me about writing a book about him, and um, of which I said I was probably not interested. But he said, "Fine, don't worry about it. Whatever you are, but I can give you. This is what you should do. You should come to my house when you like, or I will tell you when interesting people are coming, and then see what you think." And I did on several occasions, and then several more occasions, because it was so actually interesting. And then when Donald Trump began his political career, Epstein became a very significant source for me as I began writing books about Trump and politics. So I did get to know Epstein well, and I got to know what was happening in his house, and I got to know many of the people who were friends with Epstein who would come to his house regularly. Um, and in this, and this is, Epstein was a compartmentalized guy, but certainly in the view that I had, and a fairly extensive view, there was never, um, there was never any sign that that the that the people that the overwhelmingly they were men who were there for women. Um,
Right.
Quite the opposite. They were there for other men. Um, Very
Right.
clearly, this was
Well, and
was
even
the
the
men's
Southern
club.
District's prosecution, right? The Southern District wasn't told the time span was, um, I think, I mean, it wasn't. It was talking about the 20 years sort of before he went to jail the first time, right?
Well, that was always a little fudged in the Southern District's account because theoretically they had made a deal with him not to prosecute any after his jail after his time in jail. They had come to a non-prosecution agreement. So he was theoretically, everything that had happened before 2007 or 8 was off limits. So in order to reopen this, there was always then the suggestion that there was new things that we would learn, that this wasn't that they had new evidence in new crimes, and that's why that was part of the reason this prosecution was reopened. Now we don't know because Jeffrey Epstein died, and the
So,
prosecution
so
died
let
with
me ask you about that. And you've obviously seen Pam Bondi's explanation for the missing minute. Um, so did you ever think that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself?
um yeah, I mean, I remember actually one of the first phone calls I got um when Jeffrey Epstein died, which was in the beginning of August 2019, was from Steve Bannon, and who had become very friendly with Epstein, and Bannon said, um, of course he was killed. Of course he didn't kill himself. And Bannon then began to freak out and change his telephone numbers, and um, a moment of
Why?
because he was suddenly afraid. I mean, I think afraid of his own connection to Epstein.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I was never afraid, and I always take these things with a somewhat skeptical about these things, and I'm somewhat skeptical, remain skeptical that was he murdered? Yeah, I don't see that. At the same time, I'm not sure. It seems unconvincing that he would have killed himself the way it is described that he would have had to have done it, which is basically break his own neck.
Right. Right. And obviously the coincidences of the guards not being there, the cameras not working.
What? Right, yes, but at the same time, that would seem to me that that half a dozen assistant U.S. attorneys and as many FBI agents would have had to have kept quiet about details, or that they would have obviously known.
Right.
And
Well,
those guys don't keep quiet because then they don't want to, they certainly don't want to be blamed.
well, Michael, I think that, you know, Jeffrey Epstein, this story is not going away, clearly. Um,
Clearly,
so
I mean that, which is another aspect of this that's kind of extraordinary, that the story just builds and builds and builds and builds. kind of Kennedy assassination levels.
I mean, you had told me in 2002 that in 2025 we would still be talking about Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not sure I would have believed you. I mean, back then, nobody knew really who he was or anything about him other than, I mean, Donald Trump and
Yeah,
a
no,
bunch of rich New Yorkers.
no, extraordinary that he has the legend of Jeffrey Epstein is,
It's really,
uh,
it's
yeah,
really an extraordinary, maybe that's your book. Um, maybe that ultimately is the book. Um, Michael, to be continued, I feel like there's going to be much more because this isn't going to die. And the base is, you know, banging drums. And I think Mark Epstein just went on Piers Morgan's show. And, you know,
that's always the end of the road, the Piers Morgan show.
okay, well, I think he's had some interesting things to say. Anyway, can we do this again as
Of
this
course,
develops?
of course.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.